"Take your hand from her shawl," Clement, Duke of Stonehaven said from the music room doorway. Eleanor Hollingsworth had been one breath from hiding the bruises. The gray wool lay dragged from her bare shoulder. Natalie Catesby's fingers still pinched one corner of it, light as a lady choosing lace, while the marks beneath Eleanor's collarbone darkened in the lamplight. What frightened Eleanor was not the pain. Pain could be swallowed. What frightened her was that His Grace looked first at Natalie's chipped pearl ring, then at Eleanor's torn sleeve. A duke's belief could ruin a maid faster than a blow. The music room smelled of beeswax, dying candle smoke, and Natalie's sharp lavender water. Two ladies near the pianoforte had gone still, their gloved hands lifted to their mouths. No one moved toward Eleanor. No one asked why her wrist was purple. Natalie did not step back. She merely adjusted the drape of her gold satin gown and smiled.
"The poor girl tripped in the corridor, Your Grace. I was merely helping her up." Eleanor pulled the shawl tighter. Beneath the coarse wool, her thumb found the small shape of her mother's bone thimble, tied on a narrow blue ribbon around her neck. The ribbon was torn. Natalie had gripped her there, fingers digging deep, nails scraping silk and skin, all because Eleanor had spent too long arranging the fire in the drawing room while Clement was present. Clement stepped fully into the room. His dark coat seemed to take the lamplight and return none of it. He did not look at Eleanor's face. He looked at her wrist. Then slowly he looked again at Natalie's hand. The heavy pearl ring had a chip along its gold setting. The edge was sharp. "A fall," Clement repeated. His voice was not loud. That made it worse. It had the flat quiet of a man who had once given orders with guns firing behind him. "A fall that leaves the shape of a ring." Natalie's smile held, but only just. Maids are remarkably clumsy. The words landed exactly where they were meant to land, on Eleanor's station, on her silence, on the fact that a maid could be dismissed for being noticed. Panic rose cold and bright in Eleanor's chest. If this became a scandal, she would be sent away. If she was sent away without a reference, the few shillings she had saved toward her mother's sewing frame would vanish into rent for some freezing room in the village. So she did what had always kept her alive. She smiled. "It was entirely my own fault, Your Grace," Eleanor said in the pleasant, invisible tone of a good servant. "The floor was slick. Miss Catesby was very kind to assist me. If you will excuse me, the linen must be turned before supper." She curtsied. The movement pulled fire through her shoulder. Then she turned toward the servant's door. She expected him to let her go. That was how great houses kept themselves clean. Gentlewomen closed ranks. Gentlemen looked aside. Servants carried the stain. "You will not go to the linen room," Clement said. Eleanor froze. "You will go to the morning room," he continued, his eyes still on Natalie, "and you will wait there." The morning room. No servant entered it unless summoned to stoke the grate or draw back the curtains. It was a place of velvet chairs in winter sunlight, not bruised wrists and gray shawls. "But Your Grace—" "That is an order, Miss Hollingsworth." He knew her name. He had never spoken it before. That was the most terrifying thing of all. Eleanor curtsied again because her body knew obedience even when her mind had stopped working. Then she walked down the long corridor, silent on the rugs, with every shadow feeling like an eye. She had survived at Stonehaven by being useful and unseen. Now she was neither. The morning room fire was too warm. Eleanor stood beside a mahogany table and refused to sit on any brocade chair. To sit would be an offense. The wool shawl scratched her skin. The torn edge of the blue ribbon chafed beneath her collar, and she kept touching the thimble because it was the only thing in the room that belonged to her. The door opened. It was not the Duke. Dr. Everett Wadham entered with his black bag. Behind him came Cuthbert Norwood, the estate steward, his ledger tucked beneath one arm as if it were a shield. Norwood's thin mouth tightened when he saw Eleanor near the hearth. "Sit down, girl," Dr. Wadham said, gently drawing a plain stool closer. Eleanor perched on the edge of it.
Norwood remained by the door. He looked offended by the whole arrangement. "His Grace is making much of nothing," he said smoothly. "A dark passage, a clumsy maid. Miss Catesby has already explained." "It is hardly fitting for the estate physician to be called over a servant's bruised knee." "It is her shoulder and wrist, Norwood," Dr. Wadham murmured. He pushed Eleanor's sleeve back with care. Eleanor looked away. She did not need to see the marks. She could feel them. The doctor's silence lasted too long. Norwood stepped closer. "We must consider the reputation of the house. A maid who causes such disturbance, who draws such improper attention from a guest, is often better placed elsewhere. For her own nerves, of course. A month's wages and a quiet reference." Dismissal. The word struck harder than Natalie's hand. A month's wages would not buy back the frame. It would not feed her through winter. It would not keep her from begging work at a laundry where women went gray by 30. "I am quite well, Mr. Norwood," Eleanor said quickly. The smile came by habit, bright, useful, harmless. "The doctor need not trouble himself. I can work. I am perfectly fit." She smiled at him, as if gratitude could soften a knife. The door opened again. Clement walked in, and the warmth seemed to leave the room. "Is the examination complete, Wadham?" "Severe bruising, Your Grace. No broken bone. She will be sore for several days at least." Clement nodded once. He looked at Norwood. "You suggested dismissal." Norwood bowed. "Only to preserve the peace of the household, Your Grace. Miss Catesby is a gentlewoman. The girl is frail and perhaps excitable." Eleanor stared at the carpet. This was the moment. The Duke would choose the simple road. Men with titles always did when the other road required hearing a servant. Clement did not raise his voice. "Miss Hollingsworth will not be dismissed." Norwood's expression flickered. "She will return to duty only when Dr. Wadham permits it," Clement continued. "Until then she will rest in her quarters. Her wages will not be reduced. Your Grace, the other servants will learn that my orders apply below stairs as well as above." The room went still. Clement looked down at Eleanor. She kept her eyes on the carpet pattern, one hand clamped over the hidden thimble. "You are not to lift heavy baskets, Miss Hollingsworth. You are not to carry coal. You are not to stand at the irons until Wadham says you may. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Grace," she whispered. She did not look up. If she looked at him, she might do something foolish, like believe him. She did not want his protection. Protection from a man of his station was not a shield. It was a painted target, and servants were the ones left wearing it. 2 days later, Eleanor was back in the linen room. The air was thick with hot irons, damp cotton, and starch. She stood at the long oak table sorting cravats for the younger maids. Her shoulder throbbed beneath her sleeve, but she moved briskly and laughed when the scullery girl dropped a heap of napkins in the wrong basket. No one must worry. No one must slow for her. She survived by being the one everyone needed. "Eleanor," Mrs. Higgins called from the doorway, "the East Wing basket must come up before luncheon." "Right away, Mrs. Higgins." The housekeeper did not look closely at her. That was mercy of a sort. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and went to the back stairs. The wicker basket waited on the landing, packed with damp linen and far too heavy. She bent, set both hands around the rope handles and braced herself. Pain flashed up her wrist. She swallowed it. Before she could pull, Clement's voice cut down the stairwell. "Leave it, Eleanor, and let go." He stood on the upper landing, one hand on the rail, dark coat severe against the pale wall. A duke had no business near the servants' stairs. That fact alone made Eleanor's heart kick against her ribs. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I was only—" "I know what you were doing." His gaze dropped to her swollen wrist, then to the basket. Geoffrey, the footman, appeared at the corridor above with an armful of folded table linen. He stopped as if he had walked into a court-martial. "Geoffrey," Clement said. "Your Grace, carry that basket to the linen room. Then tell Mrs. Higgins that Miss Hollingsworth is not to be given heavy work until Dr. Wadham clears her. If that order is inconvenient, she may bring the inconvenience to me." Geoffrey's eyes widened. "Yes, Your Grace." He came down quickly, lifted the basket, and carried it away without looking at Eleanor. Not because he was indifferent, she realized, but because he was kind enough not to witness her shame more than necessary. Eleanor remained on the stair. "It is my duty, Your Grace," she said. "I am quite well." The smile came again. She hated how quickly it came. Her fingers went to the thimble beneath her collar. Clement looked at the movement. He had seen it in the music room. He saw it now. Every time she lied about pain, her hand found that hidden thing. "I have been reviewing the household accounts," he said. Eleanor blinked at the sudden turn. "Norwood's books," Clement continued. "The wages for the lower staff are difficult to follow." Her smile thinned. She knew exactly what the wages were. Norwood had been docking her pay for 6 months, claiming it repaid a debt her late father, a ruined curate, had supposedly owed the estate. She had no proof. Only missing coins. Only the little pencil marks she kept hidden on the inside of her workbox lid. "Mr. Norwood is very precise, Your Grace." "Is he?" Clement watched her. He did not demand confession. He did not corner her against the wall with his authority. He simply remained where he was, blocking the basket from becoming her burden again. "Heavy work is not proof of loyalty," he said, "nor is pain." Then he turned and walked back down the corridor. Eleanor stood very still. If he had carried the basket himself, she might have told herself it was pity. If he had commanded her to rest, she might have obeyed and resented him. Instead, he had made the household obey what her body could not say aloud. That was harder. That night, Norwood called her to his office and docked another shilling. He smiled while he wrote it down. Eleanor smiled back, thanked him, and went to her cold room beneath the eaves. There she took out the bone thimble and the torn blue ribbon. She laid them on the coverlet and opened her workbox. On the inside of the lid, 6 small pencil marks stood in a row, one for each month he had stolen from her. She did not cry. Crying wasted strength. But she knew the trap was closing. The next afternoon the summons came. Not to the morning room, to the library. Eleanor entered carrying freshly pressed linen, because a servant must always have a reason to cross a master's threshold. The door stood open to the passage, and Geoffrey the footman was within sight by the coal scuttle, which made the room feel less dangerous. Still, Eleanor kept her eyes lowered. Clement sat behind a great oak desk surrounded by ledgers. "Put those down, Miss Hollingsworth." "Come here, if you please." The courtesy startled her more than a command would have. She set the linens on a side table and approached. "I cannot reconcile these household inventories," Clement said, turning a heavy book toward her. "The linen purchases do not match what is in use. You know the stores better than anyone." Eleanor hesitated. To correct a duke's ledger was to step out of one's place, yet the numbers were wrong. She could see it from where she stood. "If I may." "Your Grace." She stepped closer. Ink leather and cold air clung to him. She pointed to a column. "These sheets were torn in the spring. They were not discarded. I cut them down for the servants' quarters, and these cravats were frayed. I turned the hems. They are still in use, though the ledger marks them as replaced." Clement watched her hand as she pointed. Her knuckles were red from washing. Her wrist was still swollen. For half a breath his gaze held there, not with pity this time, but with something warmer and more dangerous than pity. His hand tightened around the pen. Then the soldier in him returned and his face went still. "You mend everything," he said. "Only what I am allowed to touch, Your Grace." The answer escaped before she could smooth it. His gaze lifted to her face. For one dangerous second, Eleanor felt seen too plainly. "And when you leave Stonehaven," he asked, "what will you mend then?" No one asked her that. No one asked what she wanted beyond clean linen, steady work, silence, obedience. The mask cracked a little. "I mean to buy a sewing frame," she said. "My mother's. It was sold to a merchant in the village after she died. If I had it back, I could take in fine mending. I could rent a small room. I could work under my own name." Clement did not smile, as if the dream were sweet and foolish. He reached for a fresh sheet of paper. "Describe it." "Your Grace." "The frame." She stared at him. "Describe it to me," he said again. So she did. The carved rosewood, the brass tension screws, the small chip on the left leg where her mother had once struck it against the hearthstone and laughed. He wrote every detail down with the precision he gave to estate accounts. He treated her hope like a fact. Eleanor stepped back before the warmth in her chest could show on her face. Hope was more dangerous than pain. Pain warned. Hope invited one to lean forward. The corridor outside the dining room was crowded that evening. Guests moved toward supper in a soft rustle of silk lace and polished shoes. Eleanor stood pressed to the wall with a tray of clean glasses, waiting for the gentry to pass. It was a servant's skill to make herself as narrow as the wainscot. Natalie swept past in emerald silk. She saw Eleanor. She slowed. As she passed, she let one white evening glove slip from her hand. It landed at Eleanor's feet. "Oh, my glove," Natalie said loudly. The corridor chatter thinned. "Pick it up, girl." Eleanor looked down. To retrieve it, she would have to bend across the bruised shoulder and put weight through her wrist. Natalie knew that. Natalie wanted the flinch. She wanted the guests to see a servant brought low by a scrap of kid leather. Clement appeared at the end of the hall. He saw the glove. He saw Natalie's little smile. His jaw tightened, and he took one sharp step forward. Eleanor understood at once. He would defend her. And then the story would no longer be that Miss Catesby had humiliated a maid. It would become that a maid had drawn the Duke into a public quarrel. His protection would be twisted into proof against her. Before Clement could speak, Eleanor sank into a deep curtsy. She picked up the glove with her uninjured hand and rose with her smile bright and steady. "Your glove, Miss Catesby," she said clearly. "The floor is quite clean, thankfully." A few guests looked aside. One older lady pressed her lips together, almost amused despite herself. Natalie snatched the glove. She had wanted pain. Eleanor had given her courtesy and made it sharper than complaint. When the corridor emptied, Eleanor turned and found Clement standing very still. All the command in him seemed to have broken inward. He looked at her not with pity, but with a grief so quiet she almost did not recognize it. He gestured toward a narrow side passage. Eleanor followed, heart pounding. The door closed behind them. "Why did you do that?" Clement asked. His voice was rough. Not angry at her, she thought. Angry near her. "I would have stopped her." "I know, Your Grace." The bright smile remained because she did not know what else to do with her face. "But it would have caused a scene. It is much easier this way. I am quite well." Her hand rose to the thimble. Clement saw it. He stepped closer, then stopped himself before he came too near. "Do you know why I cannot bear to watch her humiliate you?" Eleanor shook her head. The smile faltered. "In Spain," he said, staring into the dim passage, "there was a laundress attached to the camp. She came to my tent and said a lieutenant had struck her, threatened her. I was a captain. The lieutenant was the son of an earl." His voice flattened. "I told her I would file a report. I told her to wait for the colonel's inquiry. I obeyed the neat little ladder of rank. The silence in the passage tightened. By morning she was gone. They said she had run away. I never believed it. Eleanor forgot to breathe. "When I saw Miss Catesby touch you," Clement said, "I saw that tent. I heard myself choosing order over a woman who had asked me for help." His coldness was not pride. It was punishment. He had built his discipline around an old failure and called it control. Eleanor looked at him and saw for the first time the wound beneath the Duke. "I am not that woman, Your Grace," she said. The words came softly, but they did not shake. "And you are not that captain anymore." She curtsied and left before he could see how badly her hands trembled. It was past midnight when Eleanor entered the winter garden. The house slept behind her. In the glass house, the air was damp and scented with earth and orange leaves. She carried a candle from brazier to brazier, checking that the coals still held enough heat to keep the little trees alive through frost. A figure stood at the far end of the aisle. Clement. He held a small leather-bound book in his hand, the wage book. Eleanor should have turned back. A maid alone with a gentleman at midnight was a danger, even when nothing improper passed between them. But the glass doors stood visible from the passage, and the memory of his raw voice kept her feet moving. Clement looked up as her candle approached. "He has been stealing from you," he said. "Norwood. Half your wages every month entered as debt repayment. There is no such debt in the master ledger." Eleanor lowered the candle. "I know." His face changed. "You knew?" "Yes." "And said nothing." There it was again, the flare in him, the instinct to command the world back into order. Eleanor straightened. "Who would believe me? He is the steward. I am a maid. If I spoke, I would be dismissed for slander. If I am dismissed, I lose the frame. I lose my room. I lose the little future I have managed to imagine. You let them bleed you because you think you have no right to justice. No." The word was sharper than she intended. Clement stopped. "I let them do it because I know exactly how the world works," Eleanor said. Her voice trembled, but it held. "You are angry, Your Grace, but not at me." He did not answer. "You are angry because once you obeyed and someone weaker paid for it." The candle flame shook between them. Clement looked at the wage book, then at her. "And you," he asked quietly, "why do you smile when you are in pain?" Eleanor turned her face away. No one had ever asked the question as if the answer mattered. "Because servants who look hurt are called troublesome," she said. "Troublesome girls are sent away. I smile so no one has to stop for me. I smile so I am not a burden." Her hand rose toward the thimble. Clement moved. Not to seize her wrist, not to stop her. He only held out his hand palm up near hers, an invitation, a question. Eleanor let her hand fall. For once she did not smile. "What do you want, Eleanor?" Her name and his voice hurt more than the bruise. "To stop saying I am well when I am not," she whispered. The winter garden grew very quiet, not empty, waiting. "The harvest supper is tomorrow," Clement said at last. "Tenants, servants, guests, the whole estate will be under one roof. If I remove Norwood quietly, he will speak. Miss Catesby will speak." Eleanor knew what that meant. Natalie would not go quietly. She would use whatever weapon she had prepared, and she would aim it at the part of Eleanor's life that could least survive a stain. Her name. The attack came the next afternoon. Eleanor was summoned to the housekeeper's sitting room. Mrs. Higgins was not there. Cuthbert Norwood sat behind the desk, with his ledger closed before him. Natalie stood by the window, white gloves buttoned to the wrist. "Close the door, girl," Norwood said. Eleanor obeyed. The room felt too small. Natalie turned from the window. You have been very clever, Eleanor, lingering in corridors, showing just enough injury to stir a gentleman's conscience. But pity is a thin thread. It snaps when pulled too hard. I do not seek his grace's pity, Miss Catesby. For once, Eleanor did not smile. Norwood pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. This is a confession. It states that you loosened your gown deliberately to attract the Duke's attention, and that you injured yourself in a fit of temper after he rebuffed you. Sign it. Eleanor stared at the page. It is a lie. It is a kindness, Natalie said softly. That softness was worse than shouting. If you sign, you receive a month's wages and a reference to a house in London. A modest house, naturally, but one where the mistress does not ask many questions. Eleanor did not move. Natalie came nearer, her perfume floating coldly through the room. If you refuse, I shall go downstairs before supper and say only what society is already prepared to believe, that a pretty maid grew ambitious, that she mistook a duke's momentary concern for admiration, that she bruised herself in a foolish scene when her hopes were corrected. Her smile did not reach her eyes. The guests below are friends of my family. One word from me and you will not merely lose this place. No respectable house in the county will take you, not as a maid, not as a seamstress, not even as a laundress. The trap was cleanly made. If Eleanor signed, she survived by helping to bury herself. If she refused, Natalie would bury her in public. Norwood held out a pen. Sign. The door opened so hard the latch struck the wall. Clement stood on the threshold. He looked at the paper, then at Norwood, then at Natalie. Step away from the desk. Norwood paled but did not move. Your Grace, this is a household matter. The girl has confessed. I have confessed nothing, Eleanor said. Clement looked at her. For a moment she saw the fight in him, the urge to stride in, take the pen, tear the paper, and end it by force of rank. Instead, he held still. He made himself a wall at the door, not a hand over her mouth. Norwood saw his hold slipping and turned vicious. You will pack your trunk, Miss Hollingsworth. You are dismissed. No servant leaves Stonehaven under accusation until she has chosen her answer, Clement said. You will not touch her belongings. You will not speak to her again without a witness present. Then he looked at Eleanor. The choice was hers. Eleanor looked at the pen, at the paper, at Natalie's cold, certain face. The world always expected maids to break quietly. She reached to her collar and drew out the torn blue ribbon. The bone thimble hung at the end, dull and plain in the afternoon light. Her mother's tool, not a jewel, not a weapon. A thing made for repairing what careless hands damaged. She let it rest against her palm. I will not sign, Eleanor said. Natalie's face hardened. Then you have chosen a very public lesson. Clement stepped aside, leaving the doorway open. We shall see what the truth ruins, he said. Eleanor walked out first. Her knees shook, but she walked. The great hall was loud that evening. Long tables were set with roasted meats, pies, apples, and brown jugs of ale. Tenants sat at the lower end. Household servants sat together near the middle, uneasy in their best caps and coats. The gentry occupied the high table on the dais, glittering beneath candlelight, as if nothing ugly could ever touch them. Eleanor stood in the shadows near the kitchen passage. She wore her gray dress. Her hands were empty. She had been meant to serve, but Mrs. Higgins had quietly taken the tray from her and said nothing more than, "Stand where you can breathe." Natalie sat at the high table in jewels. She leaned toward one lady, whispered, and glanced at Eleanor. The poison had begun. Eleanor turned toward the winter garden. She needed a single mouthful of air that did not taste of watching eyes. As she slipped through the side passage, The musicians struck up a country dance bright enough to turn every head. Chairs scraped. Ladies rose to smooth skirts and exchange partners. In that little storm of motion, Natalie could leave the high table with a murmur about torn lace, and no one would think to stop her. Eleanor heard silk behind her before she reached the orange trees. Among the glass and moonlight, the night was cooler. Pale strips of light crossed the tiled floor. She had only taken 3 steps when Natalie's voice followed. "Do you think you have won because he stopped Norwood?" The hiss had gone from her voice now. She was all polished contempt. "By tomorrow, Eleanor, every drawing room that matters will know you reached above yourself and were put back in your place. That is how a house protects its name." Eleanor turned. "I may lose work, Miss Catesby," she said, "but I will not lie for you." Natalie's hand flew up. Clement stepped from the shadow beside the orange trees and caught Natalie's wrist before the blow landed. He did not twist. He did not hurt her. He simply held her arm still. At the glass doors, Geoffrey the footman stood frozen witness to the raised hand, the moonlit ring, the whole truth repeating itself. Clement looked down at Natalie's fingers. The chipped pearl ring flashed in the candlelight spilling from the hall. "The same hand," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. He released her as if the touch disgusted him. Then he turned to Eleanor. He did not step in front of her. He stood beside her. "Do you wish this spoken?" he asked. "Not shall I save you, not shall I decide. Do you wish this spoken?" Eleanor looked at Natalie, who was rubbing her wrist, suddenly pale. She looked through the glass doors at the bright hall, the high table, the servants pretending not to watch from the lower benches. She touched the thimble. "Yes," she said. Clement offered his arm. Eleanor did not take it. She walked beside him into the great hall. The noise died at once. A duke, walking with a maid in grey, was enough to silence any supper in England. Clement stopped in the center of the floor. Eleanor stopped beside him. She could feel every face turn. She could feel the old terror rising, asking her to smile, to soften, to say she was quite well, and spare everyone the inconvenience of truth. Clement looked toward the dais. "Norwood, bring the wage ledger." Norwood stood slowly. His face had the drained look of a man watching a locked door open. He brought the book. Clement took it, but did not begin with the pages. He looked at the room. "A lie has been spoken in this house. It was meant to hide theft and violence. I will not have Stonehaven kept respectable by making a servant bear the shame of those above her." A murmur moved through the hall. Then Clement turned to Eleanor. The floor was hers. For a moment, her voice would not come. Hundreds of eyes watched. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected gratitude toward the Duke, perhaps, but not speech from her. Eleanor reached to her collar and pulled the blue ribbon free. The torn silk and bone thimble lay in her palm. "My name is Eleanor Hollingsworth," she said. The first words were small. The next were steadier. "I am a seamstress. I served in this house as a maid. 3 nights ago in the music room, Miss Catesby gripped my shoulder and tore this ribbon. Her ring left the bruises I carry." Every eye moved as if drawn by a string toward Dr. Wadham at the lower table. The physician set down his glass. He did not make a speech. He only inclined his head, once grave and unmistakable. The sound that moved through the hall then was not gossip, it was recognition. Natalie stumbled into the hall from the garden doors. "She is confused. She has mistaken correction for cruelty. She—" "Enough," Clement said. "One word." Natalie stopped. Eleanor kept going before fear could close her throat. Mr. Norwood knew what had happened. Today he tried to force me to sign a confession, saying I had invented the attack. He threatened dismissal. He knew dismissal would terrify me, because he has taken half my wages for 6 months, under a debt that was never owed. Norwood's mouth opened and closed. She has no proof. Eleanor turned toward him. No proof that would matter to you, she said. But I kept my own tally. She crossed to Mrs. Higgins, who stood near the servants' table and held out her hand. The housekeeper, face pale but firm, gave her the small workbox she had quietly brought down from Eleanor's room. Eleanor opened it. Inside the lid, 6 pencil marks stood in a neat row. Beside them were 6 scraps of paper, each bearing Norwood's own hand and the amount stopped from her wages. "This is what I had," Eleanor said. "Small marks, small scraps. The sort of proof a maid keeps because no one asks for it until it is almost too late." The servants' table stirred. A groom stood first, then a kitchen maid. Then old Mrs. Higgins lifted her chin. "I saw those stoppages, Your Grace," the housekeeper said. "I was told they were by your order." Clement opened the wage ledger. His face did not change, but the cold in him sharpened. They were not. The hall went silent. Clement looked at Norwood. "Cuthbert Norwood, you are dismissed from my service. You will leave Stonehaven tonight under supervision. At first light I will place the matter before the magistrate." Norwood gripped the back of a chair. No one moved to help him. Clement turned to Natalie. "Miss Catesby, your carriage will be brought to the door at dawn. You are no longer welcome at Stonehaven." Natalie looked toward the high table. The ladies who had smiled with her at dinner now looked away. One gentleman studied his wine as if it had become a matter of national concern. Clement faced the hall again. "Miss Hollingsworth's wages will be restored in full with interest. Her reference will be written by my own hand. And let no one in this room mistake the matter. She is not the scandal. She is the woman who had more honor in a torn ribbon than this house had in all its polished silver." Eleanor lowered the thimble. She did not smile. She stood tall, breathing hard, with the whole hall looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. She had not been carried out of danger. She had walked into the center of it and named it. Natalie's carriage left at dawn. No lady came down to embrace her. No gentleman offered his arm across the steps. From the upper windows, pale faces watched the trunks being tied beneath the footman's impatient hands. Natalie kept her veil lowered, but even silk could not hide the stiffness of a woman who knew the county had begun speaking before the wheels left the drive. Norwood departed under the eye of 2 grooms before breakfast. By noon, the servants no longer said Eleanor's name in whispers of worry. They said it carefully, with a new weight. Mrs. Higgins set a cup of tea beside her without fuss. Geoffrey touched his brow when she passed. Even the youngest scullery maid stopped saying she was clumsy, and began saying very softly that she was tired. Clement bore the county's whispers without answering a single one. That, too, became an answer. 3 weeks later, the air in the village was sharp with coming winter. Eleanor stood in the small, bright room above Bell's apothecary. The windows faced the street. The floorboards creaked. The plaster had a crack above the hearth. To Eleanor, it was the finest room in Northumberland. In the center stood the rosewood sewing frame. The brass screws gleamed. The chip on the left leg was exactly as she remembered. Clement had not bought it for her. That mattered. He had found the merchant and paid only to hold it until Norwood's stolen wages were restored. Eleanor had paid the price herself, coin by coin, with money that had always been hers. When the frame arrived, Mrs. Bell had helped carry it upstairs and cried over it more than Eleanor did. Eleanor was no longer a maid in a gray dress. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, The bone thimble hung openly at her throat on a new ribbon no longer hidden beneath cloth. A knock sounded below. Voices murmured in the shop. Mrs. Bell's laugh floated up the stairs. Then heavy footsteps climbed. Clement appeared in the doorway with his hat in his hand. He was dressed plainly for a gentleman, though nothing could make him look ordinary. He paused on the threshold and waited to be invited in. Eleanor noticed that. She noticed everything now. "The light in here is good," he said. "It is your grace." His mouth softened. "My title remains Eleanor, but I am not your master." "No," she said, "you are not." The answer pleased him more than obedience would have. He stepped inside only after she inclined her head. His gaze moved to the frame, then to the new ribbon at her throat. "I have a torn coat," he said, lifting a dark wool riding coat from his arm. "It caught on a branch. I was told the seamstress here is the finest in the county." Eleanor took the coat and examined the tear. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Higgins, Geoffrey, half the village. I believe the butcher was especially firm." Despite herself, Eleanor laughed. The sound surprised her. It had no mask in it. Clement looked at her as if the laugh were something entrusted to him. "I can mend it," she said. "I would be grateful." She laid the coat across the frame. For a moment they stood on either side of it, Duke and seamstress, rank and work, old fear and something quieter trying to grow. Then Clement drew a breath. "I would like to court you, Eleanor Hollingsworth," he said, "publicly. In the village first, where your work is known and your friends may watch me behave properly. At the assembly next week, if you will allow it." Eleanor's fingers stilled on the wool. He did not rush to fill the silence. "I know what people will say," he added. "I will not ask you to bear the whispers alone. And if your answer is no, I will still bring my torn coats here and pay the fair price." He was not offering rescue. He was offering choice, with the door open behind him and the world allowed to see. Eleanor looked at the coat, then at the man. The cold command was not gone from him. It never would be. It was part of how he stood, how he faced a room, how he kept old ghosts from ruling new hours. But it no longer shut her out. He had learned to use his strength as a boundary, not a cage. "I will mend your coat, Clement," she said. His name changed the air. "And you may walk me to the assembly, but I will not dance if my wrist is tired." A smile broke across his face, real and warm and almost boyish in its surprise. "Then we shall sit when you are tired. And if I wish to leave, then I shall fetch your cloak. And if I wish to stay, then I shall be honored to stand beside you." Eleanor looked down at the bone thimble resting against her blue gown. For years it had been a hidden thing, a small, hard comfort pressed beneath cloth whenever she lied that she was well. Now it caught the winter light because she let it. Outside, a carriage rolled through the village street. Below, Mrs. Bell called to a customer. The sewing frame waited for work. The torn coat waited for her hands. Eleanor reached for her needle. Clement stood quietly on the other side of the frame, not above her, not before her, beside her. What is rank worth, after all, if it cannot kneel before courage?